All right. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and start introductions here. If y'all want to set your screen to speaker view, that might help for tonight's program. And then if everyone can go ahead and mute themselves if you aren't. All right. I do apologize about the Eventbrite link. We didn't foresee that problem of all technical issues, but there it is. And here we are. So hopefully as we get going and Veronica and Dave start their conversation, I hope that more people are able to join us. We are recording tonight's program, so we'll also be able to share this conversation, which I think will be great for community members to view going forward. So thank you, those of you that are tuning in right now. We're so thankful to have artists Dave McClinton and Veronica Chaichi join us tonight for what we know will be a fruitful conversation. My name is Kelly Hannes-Harrell. I'm an archivist at the Austin History Center and serve on the Art and Archives Programming Committee with the Archivists of Central Texas. I want to thank the other committee members, Nikki Kohlert, Lauren Davis, Rachel Winston, and Aaron Goldman for their dedication and support in planning tonight's program. I also want to thank the Austin History Center's audiovisual archivist, Afshin Nomai, for his work on filming and editing the videos in this program series. Finally, thanks to the Summerlee Foundation for sponsoring this program. A few announcements before we begin. On April 19th, we will be holding a second Art and Archives program featuring local artists Semenche and Adrian Aguilera, moderated by Rachel Winston, who serves as the Black Diaspora Archivist at the Benson Library at UT. On Sunday, April 24th, Archivist of Central Texas is hosting the Austin Archives Bazaar from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Austin Beer Garden Brewing Company. To learn more about the second Art and Archives program and the Austin Archives Bazaar, please visit the links posted in the chat. Well, we're going to begin tonight's program with an introductory video showcasing what kinds of materials can be found in the archives and introductions for our featured artists Dave McClinton and Veronica Chaichi.
My name is Dave McClinton. I'm a graphic designer and artist from Austin, Texas. And my work is digital collage. So I use archival images, family photos, photos of texture that I take on a daily basis, photos of my own face and my own hands to digitally create brand new faces and new bodies in Photoshop on a computer. The artwork I make is, I would call it culturally based, at least the particular body of work being represented today. And it is because I felt a need to communicate what it was like to be black in America, what it was like to be black in Texas, and the sense of sometimes the sense of isolation, sometimes the sense of having to contort either your body or your mind or your daily behavior just to get by, just to not be seen as an extreme other or a criminal, to convince people in the design world that you're capable. So I wanted to sort of communicate that distortion of reality of what it's like to just be a black man getting by.
My name is Veronica Chaichi, and I consider myself an intermedia artist. What that means is I make art in a lot of different ways. For me, the method of art making is less important than what will best serve the story that I'm trying to tell. And my work really does always have some aspect of narrative or purpose, whether we're looking into history or I'm trying to work from a social justice perspective or talking about my own identity as a queer person who's done a lot of low wage labor in my lifetime and advocating for people who do that now. And so the things that I do really encompass a wide range. But I was thinking about it the other day, and a common thread that runs through everything is me trying to bring into high visibility things that either are long neglected or that people purposely don't look at or that we're trained as a society to sort of overlook. And because of that, I end up using a lot of reflective materials and really bright colors. These are through lines, sort of regardless of what in specific piece that I'm trying to make.
All right. Um, Without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator, Erin Goldman. Erin is a socially engaged, multidisciplinary artist, educator, and organizer that works as a program specialist at the Austin Public Library. His efforts support a variety of art and learning initiatives, collectives, cooperatives, and grassroots organizations that focus on social, economic, and environmental justice. Thanks for being here tonight, Erin. I think you're muted still.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That would have, anyways, yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to Dave and Veronica for sharing your time, your invaluable work in the arts, and your vital relationship to community archives with all of us. And to all that are tuning in, thank you for participating in this event. We will have a Q&A near the end, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat or hold on to them until that time. And with that, I want to make sure, let us begin. So, Dave and Veronica, one of the reasons you are both selected to participate in this program is because of how your work represents communities that you identify with. Veronica, for your Meander Public Art project, you organized 3 different free workshops that included 50 community members who created lino-block portraits, like the ones we saw in that incredible video, of queer Texans that were then incorporated into the mural. And then Dave, you've said about your work through artist statements that your job as a visual communicator is to review historical information and inform the community by bringing these concepts to life, to help visually define your identity, and to distribute these stories about the strengths and trials of the African American community. With this emphasis of community identity and history in your art, how have you used archival materials to inform your work or conduct research to inspire your work?
You want to go or should I go?
I mean, I can start.
Okay,
I'd
cool.
love to talk a little bit about a more recent piece that I did that is currently on display at the Willie Mae Kirk Library. It's called Quinquagenary. And I know we do have a picture of that with all of our images that we submitted. And the task was, there was an open call to create a public art piece for one of 10 libraries in Austin. And I had in mind sort of technically the execution that I wanted to do. After my last public art piece, I wanted to do something very different, work with existing infrastructure and work with lighting. You can see that these art pieces are hanging directly from the lights at the library. So I chose that library because of the building itself. But I had no content. I had a technical idea. I had this space I wanted to do it in. And I said, well, what am I going to do it about? And the library was named after someone, Willie Mae Kirk. So the natural question is, who is Willie Mae Kirk? And like any modern person who's watching right now, I went to Google to answer that question. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is that Google is a dead end. It is not something that leads you to the actual answers that you're looking for. It just starts you out on a path. And I started to learn about her. And what was interesting to me about her was her place on the first City of Austin Human Relations Commission, now called the Human Rights Commission. And I wanted to learn more about what that was. And I knew that the History Center would have information about such an important thing in our history. We can take the slide off now if y'all want. So I reached out and I established a relationship with Monica Rodden, and I looked back at our email history today, and we actually emailed over the course of a year and a half of me doing the project back and forth about different stages, starting from when I was just writing my pitch all the way through to like the final design proposal, with me communicating with her to get different things. And one of the very first things she sent me was just the membership list of who else was on that Human Rights Commission with Willie Mae Kirk. And I noticed right away that none of the women were listed by their own names. They were all listed by their married names. And for the list, there was name and then occupation. And one of the occupations was listed as housewife, which is a very narrow thing. And I'm like, who was this housewife? And who is this Mrs. Lee Kirk? Like, I'm looking for Willie Mae Kirk. Why is her name not on this list? And there, through that piece of archival material, became the spark of inspiration, which led to the content of the piece, which was illuminated portraits of these 7 women who were not recognized by their own names when they were doing this work in our civic society. And for me, it was not a one-way thing. I didn't just get this information from the History Center and then make a piece and it's over. I also used what they gave me as starting points for further research. They didn't have images of everyone who was there. I had to create relationships with the League of Women Voters, the Texas chapter of the League of Women Voters, Sul Ross College, to find more information about these people, which in turn, I will be giving back to the History Center as part of my project notes for this project, just like I did with Meander. So I get something from the archives, and from that, I expand upon it and then grow the collection with what is important to me, which is the recognition of these historical figures who weren't even called by their own names. And so that's kind of where the relationship comes in. Like, a lot of my work starts from a place of curiosity. And a lot of times I have like a technical thing that I want to try out, and I'm looking for the story that'll best tell that. And history so often has stories that we just have to look for and kind of tease out to create that relationship where we're documenting and reevaluating history as we're working with it as a topic.
So cool to hear of your process and the way that you go beyond site specificity into social, a way to embrace connection and build relationships within your community to share those stories. That's so crucial and critical to this kind of work. Thank you so much for sharing. And Veronica, Dave, did you want to respond to that question?
Sure. The archival materials that I've found in the past have been things that I sort of, I don't know if collect is the right word, but I've sort of kept track and always sought out things like, because it was fascinating and it would sort of burn me on the inside, the notion of slave ads. And I mean, I was looking that stuff up before I was making art. It was just sort of a, I don't know if it was part of my brain just trying to understand, trying to make sense of it, trying to collect this sort of film in my mind about how I felt about all that. But one of the things that always stuck out to me, in particular, um, runaway slave ads are their own sort of thing, and the way that the person being chased is described. There's one. It's actually in my bio in my Instagram handle. It's this particular runaway was described as a cunning, artful fellow, and it's just the verbiage that's used in some of these archival materials is uh I guess it's not, it doesn't fit sometimes. It doesn't feel like that should be that type of, that's not necessarily flowery language, but it is a little over the top, and how like you wouldn't describe somebody that way today. Now the flip side of that is, and this is all in archival stuff, is that some of the ads for selling people, people would just be included in a list of things. So you're looking at a list and it would say one wheelbarrow, two wagon wheels, $3, two girls, child. And all those things were listed on a list, like a grocery list, a shopping list, a list of inventory, with no sense of who they were or what they were. Maybe it would have a skill. Maybe out to the right, there would be what their particular skill was. And all those things are just too big. And that's just two topics. All of the history of slavery and racism and Jim Crow, it's all too big for me to try to get my hands around. So I treat the archival assets that I seek out as little bits of inspiration, and I try to focus on one thing in the artwork, or one thing, one little element that I can use to build upon. And I've sort of had that thought lately that, you know, each piece is its own story, and I just can't, that's just too big of a thing to try to wrap my art practice around. And I've given some art talks before, and as I'm talking, I'm sort of playing this in my head like, this is too big. This is too big for me to try to explain away. So I need to find a way to chop things up. And I like what Veronica was talking about. Like, let's see if we can find a spark, and let's see if we can find a very particular story and tell that story about that person. So events like this are great, because to see how other people handle a pretty large topic, or something that might be too cumbersome or too emotional. I like how clean the way you described what you did was. It was a very sharp process, and I liked hearing that.
So thank you so much for sharing, Dave. And yeah, it's so interesting to hear how, yeah, like art within the practice can help us to break down and recognize these stories that are so important and such a core of us and a part of our history. How have y'all used or been influenced by your personal family archives, including photos, home movies, letters, and or artifacts?
So I was raised in New Braunfels, Texas, which is just about 45 minutes away. And in that town, there's the church called Live Oak Baptist Church, and they did a great job of keeping records. So when I was a kid, I would see these older people around the church. I was probably 5 or 6, but they were in their 70s, and I was going through a tough time really discovering what racism was really about when I was 5 or 6. But then I would be sitting in church watching somebody who was 75 walk by. And even at the age of 5 and 6, I was thinking, well, if I have to deal with what I had to deal with, what did they have to deal with? So I would and there was a gap between Sunday school and church, and I would go into the office and I would just look at all the old photos and flip through all the old things I probably wasn't supposed to be flipping through, and looking at names and photos, and I would see, oh, that was my grandfather, or that was my great uncle, and all the things that they did to keep that community going. So it just felt like the people I saw walking around were like living history, almost like these little living, breathing monuments. So those images of them, the photos of them, the stories of them, and then them actually being in my life when I was a kid, that is still the source of inspiration for the work I do.
Dave, we're vibing. We're totally like on the same wavelength with how the community, like, the history of their community speaks through to what we're doing now. I wanted to take a little bit of liberty with the word family, and with the definition of the word family, because, historically and still currently frequently within the queer community, our birth families reject us and we create what we call a family of choice. And I know there's other people who also use that language, where it's people who are not related to you by blood, but who you have that familial relationship with, who you can, who will take you to the hospital, who will take that role in your life, because often our birth families aren't capable of doing that because of rejection, discrimination, fear, those sorts of things. And the nature of a familial archive, whether it's blood family or chosen family, still stays very similar. It's letters, it's photographs, it's recipes, it's stories, it's articles of clothing. I'd like to give a specific shout out to the Lambda Archives of San Diego. They do a fantastic job of documenting the queer history of Southern California. And I've also seen a kind of a need within my queer community to hold on to this little sliver of paper ephemera that we have before it's lost to the digital, because for so long we couldn't be out at all. And then there was a queer liberation movement where people on the fringes were out and making publications about it. And there is like just a little bit of it that we have, and we hold on to it so tightly. And those Lambda archives specifically have a letter written by Bob Jessup. He went by Jess. He was a founding member of the San Diego Gay Liberation Front, which in some terms could be thought of as a militant organization. And he's responding to an angry letter he got from someone who was accidentally sent their newsletter in the mail and was quote unquote horrified about it. And he writes about the ways in which queer liberation benefits everyone. It reminds me of the writing of the Combahee River Project, where, if you liberate the people who are the most oppressed, by intrinsically, you will liberate everyone else on the ladder, and just break down all those power structures. And I keep a copy of that letter in my phone. It's like a talisman for me. And I visit it over and over to remind myself of like what I'm fighting for, to see the wisdom of my elders, and to have that connection with how far we've come and how far we have to go, but to know that like I'm not standing on the shoulders of giants, like I'm in the palm of their hands. Like they have put us here, and we have to keep pushing it further and not lose what they had.
Absolutely. And yeah, I know like learning of different archival projects is kind of a way to look back and reflect and be reminded of all of these important movements, communities, and families that have helped to like lead us. And that the shoulder of giants is a great image in relation to that. And actually this next question kind of dives right into that too. So as art is often a reflection of or reaction to politics, culture, and history, makes sense that local archives should be expanding their collection scope to include the archives of artists, or working with artists on how to better document their work and creative processes for their personal archives. How would you like to see archives better support artists in the community? And what would that look like to you?
Well, I was thinking about within that question, expanding the collection, expanding the scope of what and how they collect. It makes me sort of I guess mourn things that I don't even know about. Like there's probably so much that wasn't collected, so much that and let me flip that and just talk about it in terms of education, because it's the best way I can make the metaphor. So going back to the church again, I was we were taught Black history in the church. It was kind of a bummer when you're a kid, because who wants the sixth day of school? But that's just the way it was. Um, but it was things that then weren't going to get taught in school. And the idea that if it hadn't been for that, there was so much of our history that I wouldn't have seen. It would have just been lost. So I'm sure there are small enclaves, a church here, there, a family here, there, a small organization here, there, that are collecting things, maybe a little arts organization, but it's not a cohesive, centralized thing collecting that material. So the idea that a large organization like this would expand their reach and seek out some of those sources to sort of, it's just like spreading your arms even wider to try to gather up as much as you can, because it's important now, but it's really important 50 years from now. It's really important for the person looking for inspiration or looking for, to edify a particular thought in their head, and they come here and see things that maybe the previous, I hate to use the word regime, but maybe the previous regime wouldn't have collected. So the idea of expansion, I think is really important. And it's almost feels like you need agents in the community to help direct where those collections go, because no one's going to know everything. So they're probably, I'd be curious to learn about community outreach in both directions, to see, is it possible for a community member to offer up things to the archive? And is it possible for the archive itself to create some sort of outreach program that can get to those things that they haven't thought of or maybe don't have access to? So that's actually a really interesting thought.
That's exactly where I was at too, is it's got to start with outreach. You have to make the artists aware that you value them and you value what they're making. The creative class is one of the most exploited workforces in our country. And sometimes collectively as creators, like specifically, I'm gonna say specifically visual artists, because we live in a time when a creator refers to a teenager in Los Angeles who makes 12 times the money I've ever seen. So I'm talking visual arts. We often don't see value in our work until we're dead, And so you have to get to these people while they're alive and let them know that they are making things that you want. I did not spontaneously decide to start a relationship with the Austin History Center. I attended a panel discussion related to an exhibition from the Lisa Davis archives. One of those photos was in the introductory video. And someone on that panel said out loud, "You are Austin history and your history matters." And that flipped a switch for me, because I was already doing work that was in a historical space and trying to like suss out these forgotten people or, things that weren't talked about. And I thought, I am doing research and I bet that this is valuable. And when I did make that connection, they were like, "Oh, y'all were like, this is great. Thank you for having this. We love it." And so that's number one, is just let us know that you value us and that you want it. And number two, be open to our ideas and to how and what we collect. I think Dave had a really good point about individual people and their personal collections. Like sometimes one person who is like obsessed with an idea can have a collection that you couldn't even imagine, in their little teeny apartment somewhere on whatever part of town, because it's the thing that they know. And it might not be something that you immediately think to seek for, but if they bring it to you, know that it has value, or they wouldn't have like gone that hard with it. I think both communities can help each other so much. We both have things to learn from each other, so that, as Dave mentioned earlier, things don't get lost, because so much of it already has.
They do blood drives. What about an archival information drive? Just set aside a weekend and all hands on deck. Everybody bring us what you got. You never know.
I have been talking to a queer organization here in town about that. I was going to hit up the AHC after this event and see if they wanted to be part of it. But like I said, we're vibing.
Well, I love both these answers so much. So many good points to think about. I know, like in my role at the library, through programming and community engagement, I think a lot about how many institutions kind of define their role in outreach in and around recognizing just needs. And I think that like it's so crucial and important to recognize that all people have strengths and gifts, and it's important to associate and recognize that. And how you both were sharing too, like who has the power in the sense of controlling the story or the narrative, or what we even value, or like how much data is being collected this time in our society and what we're prioritizing in the sense. And I think a lot of artists and creatives, it's a real importance of recognizing the social and emotional relationships and how the feelings and emotions. And so all the more reason, I think, to engage creative producers in our communities to be a part and to share that role. And yeah, did y'all have anything else to add on this question? Or I think the next one we have actually kind of is another very relative segue here. So over the past few years, there's been a push in the archives and library profession to practice reparative description, create more equitable access to materials, more or less to remediate, contextualize outdated and harmful language used in describing archives, and to identify underrepresented communities and histories, and to create greater access to these collections. So how have your experiences been in researching historical documents? Have you seen gaps in the historical record? And if so, how has this informed your art?
There are huge gaps in the record where queer history is concerned. Being queer was and is punishable by law. They are passing laws right now to punish people for talking about being queer, for being openly queer. And so much of us was and is deliberately hidden for our own protection. So it just wasn't out there because we didn't want anyone to know, because you could die. All right. So there's gaps because no one was supposed to see that we were there. And repairing that is incredibly difficult because you have to get down to that granular level where it's the letter that someone's great aunt who never got married wrote to her best friend, you know, and finds like these moments that you're not looking for and that no one wanted you to know are there. And it is, it's super challenging. And what you can do is, you know, first off, don't assume that you know what a community you are not part of wants or needs. If your staff is not inclusive, your collection is not inclusive. And remember that none of us are monoliths. You need multiple perspectives from every identity and multiple types of wayfinding, because the way our knowledge works and the way we look for knowledge is also different based on our cultural background and our community background. And, you know, welcome people in, don't gatekeep. And I'm not saying that anyone does, I'm just making blanket statements about what can happen. And, you know, I try so hard to fill in some of these gaps with the portraits, and I have literally lists of hundreds of names of portraits that I still have yet to do and may never do within my lifetime. And it's heavy work, but it's so important. And just we just got to keep digging and try to uncover the hidden and bring it to light, you know?
Yeah, the idea of gaps in knowledge, in terms of historical knowledge, when it comes to the Black community, is it's apparent. There's no mystery. There's no there's nothing to really dig up in terms of trying to figure out why. A very interesting thing I'd always heard about the wall that Black people can run into when they want to research their roots. I guess this is a little related. A friend of mine bought me an ancestry.com account. So I sent my stuff in just out of curiosity, wanted to see, let's just see what we can see. And it shows you the countries of origin. Obviously, I don't know if anyone's done that, but you know, it shows you what's your DNA, how it's chopped up with various origins. And it is amazing that you can see the path of wherever my first tiny little speck of DNA started, way Eastern Africa, and you can see it move, and then you can see two little drop points in the Carolinas where the slave ships were landing.
it's like, it's kind of stunning when you look at it and you go, okay, that's where my American part starts. And it's, I mean, it's, there's no mystery. Like you look at it and you go, okay, that's where. So when you look at it from the backward, if you're looking backward, there won't be any record past that for people I might be looking for. Like I might not be able to get past 1790 in terms of trying to figure out my own personal history, or maybe perhaps even in the 1800s, depending. So the idea that we're all looking to fill some gaps and sort of repair how things have been recorded is, it feels monumental. So I would think that the best thing for all of us to do is that very cliche phrase of one step at a time, you know, and we fix one little error, fix one little gap, fix one little problem at a time. And hopefully we can, you know, engender a passion in that for the next generation, because it's going to take generations and generations and generations to try to fill back in what that history is and was. But it's just, again, I've said it before, it really does feel like it's too big to fix. So conversations like this are certainly add to the optimism of hearing what other people are working toward, and the effort that they're making. So yeah, it's a thing that informs my work in that. So the way I create the work is a little an eye from a different source, a nose from a different source, and it just stitched something brand new. And I just kind of hope that those new identities I'm creating can somehow communicate this sense of loss, this sense of pride despite that loss. It's a daunting task, and it wasn't one I was necessarily sure I was even going to do as an artist. I was just making images. And then my own sense of justice in history sort of took over what I was making. Like I didn't start out doing this. It's something that kind of took over.
So powerful. So there are many internal, external motivations for creating visual work, as well as performance-based work. How would you describe the local history of your city as a motivator for creating and showing work in this community?
I feel like Austin has a really great opinion of itself, and I want to hold it to that standard. You know, like there's a lot of things that it says that it is, and I'm gonna make sure that it stays that way, or that it, you know, it walks the walk, because it talks a whole heck of a lot. And I don't know if there's enough walking going on, you know, but the fact that it does talk means that I have something to hang on to when I'm pushing against it. If it was saying something else, I don't know if they'd listen to me at all. But the fact that they at least like to think of themselves, ourselves, as, you know, liberal, forward thinking, blue dot, red state, fight the power, rock and roll, woo, kind of thing, means that I can say, you know, you said this, but look at what you're actually doing. And they might take a second to think about it. And so it puts it in a somewhat more favorable atmosphere than I could be in other parts of the great state of Texas. But it's always a challenge. You're always trying to find yourself. This place is, I've been here 20 years. This place has changed so much. And, you know, trying to hold on to that character and improve it can be challenging when you can't really control where it's going to go at all. But there's an openness here, which at the very least lets you start things, and we'll see if we can finish on.
Yeah, I think of the work I'm doing as, I try to think of it as beyond the city because of precisely what you just said. It's not, and it is kind of it's kind of a fake oasis.
Yeah.
You know, like I just spent a lot of time in Houston. There are areas of Houston that are much more inclusive than Austin. There are areas in San Antonio that are more inclusive than Austin. And There obviously, of course, there are areas that are much less and more blatantly hostile. Um, but there's something. So I grew up, I said I grew up in New Braunfels, tiny little town. It used to be anyway before Schlitterbahn, and there was a lot of hostility there. Now this is going to sound weird, but I grew very comfortable with that hostility because I knew what it was and where it was and where it was coming from. And I knew all the moves I needed to make to get by. When I'm in a place that is smiling to me, but behaving in a very hostile way through economic choices, through political actions that aren't necessarily visible on a daily basis, that's a completely different experience. I don't know where, I'm shaking one hand, but I don't know where the punch is coming from. When I grew up in a really segregated town, I knew where the punch was coming from. So when it caught me or I ducked it, there was no mystery. There it was. But here, it really does just, you can look no further than 11th Street. Look no further than that neighborhood of what it was and what it used to be. When it was all Black, it was considered a scary part of town. It's not considered scary anymore because it's not Black anymore. So, and we're supposed to be a blue city. I wonder about blue sometimes. So when I'm making work, I don't necessarily think about my specific location. I think about all my travels and where I've been and how people have reacted to me and how I react to those particular environments. So it's not really the local history that necessarily drives what I do. It's just it's a part of it because there's so much of a broader experience, particularly in Texas. Texas is, it really is its own thing. The way I felt in Lubbock a few months ago is completely different from the way I feel in Austin sometimes. I had a certain cliche image of what Lubbock was going to be like. And I'd rented a car. I'm sorry, I told you I rambled, so this is me rambling. So I rented a car to go to a show, to have an art show. And I asked the rental agent for a piece of paper so I wouldn't have to be fumbling for my phone looking for the receipt because I knew I was going to get pulled over. So I wanted to have a sheet of paper that I could grab instead of a phone that could be mistaken as a gun. So I wanted to have that, and I did get pulled over. But the most pleasant experience I've ever had getting pulled over. I explained to the 50 plus year old officer that I was lost looking for this arts organization. And he goes, "Oh, I know where it is. Just follow me." So we get back in our cars. I follow him to the Louise Hopkins Underwood place, and he goes, "There you go." And I said, and I had run a red light, by the way. And I said, what about the red light? And he just looks at me and he goes, and I'm expecting all kinds of problems. And he just looks at me and he says, "We'll worry about the red light next time." And he just drove away. Now, that's kind of my fault for expecting it, but also, what else did you expect me to expect? So I guess that little anecdote, I'm just sharing it to say that Texas is so weird and different, and the experiences are so broad that I could never just focus on my own local experience for inspiration and finding things that I want to talk about in my work. I could have just said that instead of the whole thing, actually.
I love that story, though. I'm glad you shared it. And I think you bring up an important point that Texas is definitely a thing. And I feel with some of my portrait projects that I don't think I would necessarily be doing them with such fervor if I wasn't in Texas, because Texas is like just so loudly anti-gay. And there's an assumption on the part of people who live other places that there are no queer people here, that we should all just move away. I'm like, where am I going to get my brisket if I'm not here? Trust me, they don't do it anywhere else. I was a vegetarian when I moved here, by the way. That changed real quick.
Wow.
But truly, I think part of why I do at least the public work that I do is because I'm in Texas, and because I feel this need to push back against those narratives that we're not here, and that if we are here, we're fools for being here. I'm part of a gender diverse community, and I often make the joke that I feel the same way about womanhood as I do about Texas. It's not going to get better if I leave, you know, like I need to stay and fight for recognition for women. I need to stay and fight for recognition for queer people, because this is our state too. And so Texas is definitely more of an influence on me almost than Austin. And I'm just, I'm privileged to do the work that I do in Austin, although there's absolutely other cities where I have found great welcome as well. Yeah, you never know, but I will tell you, I definitely act a different way when I'm 30 miles outside of this town and traveling with a companion, you know, just, you don't want to get hurt. So
yeah, it's this I think we talked about this when you and I were just talking a couple of weeks ago, that there's this empathetic reality that we should, I mean, you know, you should know exactly how I feel in certain places, and I should know exactly how you feel in certain places, because it's such a similar sensibility. I mean, then that knowledge should make us should allow us to communicate better and come together better. So hopefully that is something that we can both you know, illustrate or at least talk about in our work.
yeah, definitely.
I'm so grateful both of y'all are in this community to help represent and challenge some of that stereotyping that can occur within contextualizing Texas, and honestly the South as a greater whole. It is so important for people to recognize and see that, and I think it really shows in your work, and that's what it's about. Before we head to audience Q&A, we were going to ask if y'all had any questions for each other.
I had a question for you, Dave, because I've found often when I'm moving, especially in artist spaces, I feel obliged to take on the role of educator. Like people have questions about queerness and they're like, oh, we can ask Veronica, she's safe. I wonder if you have a similar experience in art spaces as well, and how you feel about that. Sometimes I'm so over it, and sometimes I'm like, well, this is the work I'm here to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting that I resist it, because I feel like me talking about the work should be enough. But also it's a mood thing. It whatever mood I'm in, it's a very different thing. I was at an art fair a couple of years ago, and that was a thing where there was nowhere to hide. I was standing in front of my work and just crowds of people were walking by. And the reactions and the questions I got all day long for 4 days in a row was exhausting. But also at the end of it, I felt like I understood my art better, because I had just spent 4 days explaining it and arguing about it. I got into arguments about it. And the idea that I sometimes I feel like I'm resisting trying to behave as though I'm representing all Black men in Texas or America, but it does get put on you. It does. And again, it's a mood thing. Maybe sometimes I just jump in and think, well, my opinion should cover most of these issues, so let me go ahead and speak on that right now. But then other days I'm just like, it's not, you can't just rely on this one thing I'm going to say. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that, and so you yourself, you feel like you need to take that on.
Well, like how you said, it's a mood thing. I don't know if I need to take that on. I know people ask me all the freaking time to explain things to them that they don't understand. I mean, a lot of the world is really confused about what it means to be a queer person right now and what different identities are. And I'm supposed to be a walking dictionary of that, just because girls are beautiful. And sometimes I'm in the mood for it, and sometimes it's like, you know, there's Google, you know.
Yeah.
Like there's other things. I'm not here to talk about that. Not all of my work is super queer either. Like a lot of it is about class systems. I do a lot of work about low wage labor and about gendered labor. And I can get real fired up about that, but no one asks me about that as a matter of course. Like I bring it up, you know, I get asked about, oh, so you're gay, right? Can you explain this thing to me? Or like, my kid just said something, what does that mean? And I'm, you know, sometimes I'll do a mitzvah And sometimes I'll do it, not right now, you know. I'm gonna check out the canapes. And I was just wondering about your experiences with that as well.
No,
just like
it's
translating a culture for a culture that doesn't understand it.
Or there's like this overt effort to act like they do understand it.
Yes.
So I can't tell you how many sharecroppers I've met showing my work. Everybody had a sharecropper in their life. Everybody's grandmother picked cotton. I mean, everyone. Because whether they did or they didn't, just this weird, it's like this really complicated way of saying some of my best friends are Black. Like like they go out of their way to try to act like they understand, and then that can be taxing because I was raised by a Sunday school teacher and a staff sergeant 20 years in the Air Force, so I'm kind of taught to be polite. Like that's my first go-to. But it can be hard to sort of be polite in some of those situations. And here's the thing about representation. If I act a certain way, all I'm going to do is contribute to the angry Black man stereotype. So it's kind of like I have to keep it to myself if I don't want to contribute to that. And if I do, I have to be okay knowing I'm contributing to that. So the idea of that sort of thought process of representing the entire community or not is I don't know. I'll never figure that out. It's just case by case.
No, it's a unending morass, and I don't always get it right. You know, like I am one human who has one experience. I am not qualified to speak for everyone. I'm qualified to speak about this, and sometimes I'm not even qualified to speak about that. It depends on the day.
Right. I wanted to ask you about artifacts. So you said there's a letter you keep on your phone.
Yeah, well, I keep a photograph of it.
Right. So in terms of the physical, now I know it's a photo of, but still it's a representation of a physical thing. So where do you come out on sort of felt, read, or understood bits of history versus a physical artifact? Like how do you try to engender that into the work? Do you try to have your work become the new artifact that then is transmitting all this other, like, how do you feel about that?
I think I'm trying to create new artifacts. I think that's a good way to put it. And again, that's not my entire body of work, but definitely the work I do within the public art sphere is to create new artifacts based on existing materials. I like to do what I call contemporary portraiture. So it's that window of time after the camera was invented, but before the internet, because these are images that exist physically in the world, but you have to physically go and look for them. And so by finding those, which is something that I do working with various archives, and then translating them into an art piece, which then exists in the digital and references something that only exists in the actual, I'm trying to make those connections through history. And so, yeah, I'm not saying that what I'm making is, it's almost more of a wayfinding tool, maybe. You know, we talked earlier about reparative description. I'm taking images that are described as like, here is a picture of this person, and then I am reappropriating it and describing it. Here is this person who was a member of this community and did this thing and went by this name and is part of this project because of this thing. So I'm almost trying to go back and expand, maybe not repair as much as expand what that person was known for or what that story is.
Yeah, reappropriating. I like that word.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the to recuperate, kind of how like within culture jamming movements and how people have come about that strategy of taking how power controls power of representation, how we can reclaim it.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah, were there any other last questions y'all wanted to ask? Again, thank y'all so much for your time. I just want to make sure we give an opportunity here before we move into any Q&A from the chat.
I have a feeling that we could just jam for a while, so maybe
I do
let's see
too.
what the audience has to say.
Okay. All right, well, we'll go ahead. I guess, so then, let me see here. Lauren, I don't see any questions, but I'm not sure if you may have a different insight into the chat than I have. But are there any questions that have been presented to you?
Nothing that I've seen. No, not yet.
All right. Well, that being said, if anyone feels comfortable enough to share through mic, or if you'd like to at this time place any questions you might have for Veronica and Dave in the chat, you can go ahead and open it up.
We're a meme right now, that awkward moment when you're waiting for questions after the talk.
If you look at our eyes, you can tell when we're looking at the chat. You can tell we're scanning down.
I have a question. Hi, I'm Molly, and I'm actually on the staff at the Austin History Center as well. And I liked, Veronica, what you, or both, thank you to both of you, absolutely, for like talking and challenging archives to do a better job about outreach and collecting for artists. I was curious, Veronica, you had talked about like different ways of wayfinding because people have different ways of thinking and working through stuff. And could you expand a little bit on that? I think that's a great idea. And I was just curious if you could expand on that a little bit about what other ways you kind of imagine would be helpful.
Sure. I can just speak in very broad terms. I mean, y'all are the professionals in like how these things are actually categorized. But I know that sometimes search terms are not always what we think they're going to be. You know, I arrive at a lot of things really obliquely. You know, like how did I started with William A. Kirk, and somehow that led me to the Human Relations Commission. And what I ended up researching was the Human Relations Commission. And so I think there needs to be definitely stronger connections between not just a person's name, but the other things they were involved with. You know, one of the people who's in Quinquagenary is Sue McBee. And as y'all know, she founded the darn History Center. And when I pulled out her folder full of pictures, there was no information about the founding of that in that folder. So that felt odd to me. I wasn't looking for that, but I assumed in this box, you know, these things would be together. So is the Austin History Center history over here and Sue McBee's over there? Like, why aren't they brought together? And so that would be maybe a suggestion on my part, is just to break it down a little differently. For example, I know that the Meander portraits are kept as a single collection of Meander portraits, but the idea was for people to be able to search for the names of the people in the portraits and have that pop up. They're not going to know necessarily that they're in that collection. They should be, like, I did an information request recently about Jennifer Gale, and my portrait of Jennifer Gale did not come back. And it made me wonder, is that portrait not listed as Jennifer Gale? Because there's a reason I did that and put it into the archive. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
Absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, one of the natures of archives is things being all over the place, and the challenges of bringing those together. And yeah, any thoughts that people have, and not necessarily, like, not being a professional in the field is super helpful, because you're the audience out there that's looking for this stuff. You know, we're so deep in it that it's hard to see. So having outside ideas is super helpful. So thank you.
I'll come in and tell y'all how to do your job anytime. Full of ideas.
I have a question because I didn't think we got to spend enough time, Dave, talking about your practice and the layers within your work. I'm happy to share some of the images that you sent me to share on the screen, because I think they're really a powerful use of like, some people use archives, like Veronica has used archives to then create like a new artifact, but like the actual, like, you're doing a lino block of a portrait, of a photograph, so then it's like this new thing. But then Dave, like, you're incorporating images, like the actual archival images in your work. Like, it's not you know, it's more of the use of it than than it like informing a new thing, you know, like I don't know if I'm trying, if I'm expressing it
No,
correctly.
I get where you're headed. The if you wanted to pull up the image number 3.
Okay. Let me get there.
So I can start describing it while you're looking for it. So
Yeah.
there's a notion of that's in every Black man's mind. Again, I said I wouldn't speak for all of us, but here I am. The notion of respectability. There might be a little bit of a zoom left, so if you like double clicked on those on the boys, see if
Oh,
we can
wait.
get it. Yeah, just a little closer is fine. So those suits, the little remnants of suits, little lapels and vests and ties and things. Back in the early 20th century, mugshots were taken from head to toe. So you would see a man in a suit and it would just look like a dude in a suit, but then you would see what he had been arrested for. And most of the mugshots that I found were of like white men, in particular gangsters in larger cities. So that the head that you see is an amalgam of images from my childhood photos. That's actually me as a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 12-year-old in the heads. And the bodies were made up of me sampling from the series of those mugshots of white criminals. And the idea that society would look at the white man in a suit and think he was respectable, but they would look at a young Black boy and not have the same thought. So I've cloaked them. So, and it's not even something that I talk about, or it's not labeled. It's not that information's not in this particular art. Like you don't see it. No one would know it unless I told you. But I love reappropriating things that were originally meant to be criminal, but I'm using to show respectability in a world where, in a country, in a state, that people automatically assume I'm a criminal. So I love that twisting of image and metaphor. It's something I do a lot, and it's not necessarily something that I talk about. If someone asks me, I would tell them. But I love the flipping of what's respectable, what's a criminal, what's respectable, what's a criminal, and it's generally not the clothes. It's generally the skin of the race that is deemed that is used to determine whether or not you're respectable. Now there are other themes and metaphors in there as well. There's because the true inspiration of this piece was a lynching photo, but I wanted to bring that up just to talk about the source material of where I got those little snippets of the suits. Because I just thought it was an apt description of what you were asking in terms of finding an archival image and then finding a new way, or letting that archival image help my description and what I wanted to get across in terms of the art. So yeah, that it just felt like that was the best piece to use to talk about that.
And so, what is the reason behind not divulging that, like in the title of the piece or in the explanation of the piece? Like you said, if people ask, or if you're like expanding on it, I mean, is there a reason?
It's too much to explain.
Okay.
There's just so many metaphors. Like I said, this was really inspired by a photo of a lynching. So most lynchings wound up with the body being mutilated, and there just happened to be this photo, I guess, before the mutilation happened. And the young boy had been hung. He was still in a suit. He was, at the very top of the tree. None of the shooting or the burning had started yet. But it was shot in a way that if you photoshopped out the rope and photoshopped out the tree, it would have looked like a young boy standing in a field looking at the sky, looking at the clouds. So that was the inspiration for the piece. So there's so many metaphors packed into some of these things that it can be, I think, overwhelming to explain every last bit I've talked about my childhood photos. There's like three different things going on in this piece that, if someone asks me what it's about, I can explain that one particular thing, but every piece would have a 2 or 3 paragraph thing under it. And I'm kind of going for, I don't mind explaining, but I'm really going for a vibe. I'm really wanting the viewer to look at it and come away with something. And if they have a question, sure, I'll gladly answer it. But yeah, it's just, I pack too many things. Well, that sounds like I'm being negative. I pack so many things into the pieces that there's simply no way I could explain everything for every image. So that's really, it's just a matter of my time that I don't bother writing everything about every detail, because it can get nuts.
That makes sense. That really does. And I'm wondering, Veronica, if you want to respond to that, because I feel like maybe a lot of the stuff within your works has so many layers. The Meander mural alone as one of the, with all the designs that you studied to pick a final one. In fact, if you don't mind if I share it, just because.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and you don't have to talk about that one specifically, but I feel like Dave, what he was saying, applies to you as well.
Well, I do want to make the point that that's why we make visual art. Like, if we wanted to, we could write a book, right? But we make visual art so that we can have these layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of information that is transmitted to your brain instantaneously when your eyes look at it, And it's up to the individual to decide whether or not they are intrigued. It's up to us to intrigue them so they look at it. And it's up to the individual to decide if they're intrigued enough to investigate deeper what the meaning is. And that decision on their part might change from day to day. But yeah, I don't know a single visual artist who doesn't have layered meanings. Dave, I think what's unique about your work is that you have such a direct lineage of where things come from. A lot of people are taking their meaning from a more abstract way. And I love how much, just factual information you're packing in. And I do think that the vibe is coming through for sure. It's fascinating to hear you talk about that. And it's why we should all go to more artist talks. But yeah, this piece that's on the screen right now is a mural that's at 30th on Lamar. It's called Meander. And it was my first major public art project, and it was extremely challenging because I went through many, many layers of approval. And at the last layer of approval, they did not approve of the design because of how overtly queer it was and concerns they had about community reaction. And also simultaneously, and by they, I mean a specific commission that reviews all public art, thought that I was not being inclusive enough within the varied identities within queerness, which was a really weird balance to strike, like not too gay, but make sure you get all the gays. And it was so hard, y'all. And it looks so different from what I originally intended it to be. But I've grown to love what it is. And I did a ton of research into my own community that I don't know if I necessarily would have been spurred to do otherwise. And part of the Austin History Center collection is just the notebook where I sorted all of this out, trying to figure out, okay, if I need to include everyone, who is everyone? What symbolizes them? Like, how many sub-identities are there? Am I trying so hard not to create a hierarchy? And there's 2 layers of color information. So the pattern that goes through it is called a meander or a Greek key design. And it was being used simultaneously in several different ancient cultures. Like, you'll find this pattern in like Chinese antiquities and Greek vases that were being made at the same time, where we don't have a record of trade between those countries. So I think it speaks to something, kind of chthonic, subconscious in the human brain, building images that way. Oh, I'm starting to get a little echo. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Ooh, I feel like Elvis. So that's the pattern, and there's a background and a foreground. And in the background is what we call the Philadelphia flag. So it's the traditional pride flag, but with added black and brown stripes to acknowledge the fact that people of color within our community face challenges that white people like me do not. Just point blank. And it's palindromic. That wall is 4 feet high by 180 feet long, which is also a super weird shape to work with as a composition. So it starts from the outside and works its way in. And then within the keys themselves, so the foreground image, are the colors of a variety of pride flags. I tried to get everybody in there. I'm not going to go down the list because if I try to say them out loud, I will forget someone. But color-wise, I try to get them all in there. And then thirdly, within the keys, and you can see it on some of the darker ones more clearly, those little white rectangles in the background are little teeny baby portraits of different queer people who have associations with Austin or Texas, or who sometimes were not recognized as queer within their lifetime, simultaneously to with portraits that community members did. Because I did not want to separate the queer people from the community, because we are the community and we're all in this together. So this is one of the portrait sessions that I did at the Senior Center, which is like a mile away from the mural site, where people were invited to come in, and I'd led them start to finish through the process of making a lino block portrait. They could print as many prints as they wanted, but they left the blocks with me, and then I printed those directly onto the wall, as well as made a set of prints, which is in the collection at the AHC. And so it was a community project from like a lot of different angles. There's people memorialized on there, which was not something I was going for or that occurred to me, but was actually really beautiful. There was a number of people who took that opportunity to be like, my friend loved Peace Park and I would like his picture to be there forever. And I was like, oh gosh, making me misty. So yeah, it's just layers upon layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. But you look at it with your eyes and it goes right into your brain. And that's what visual art can do.
Very cool.
I've gotten much better at that type of work now. That was the first one and it was so hard. I've learned to navigate the systems a little bit better. I've learned to execute things technically a little bit better. I do love that piece, but also I always feel the need to put that caveat, like there's stuff I could have done better.
It's so cool to hear. Like, I know like social practice, community arts, how you both kind of approach it in such a different but like critical way. And I know like in those processes, the narratives that those like you have the artifact of the mural and its embracement of all of these stories. In a way, like the mural serves as an archive in a way of all of the events and happenings you hosted in the community to bring people together, which is really cool. Yeah.
We held the sessions at the Senior Center, but they were open to anyone. And our youngest participant was 12 years old and our oldest participant was 96. So there really was just like a wide range of people who came out and took part in it. And I also did some outreach with local schools, GSA groups, Gay Straight Alliances, and worked with some after school programs to have the kids do portraits as well.
Super cool.
I guess we're hitting the end of the hour. So if someone has a quick question, otherwise we may say our goodbyes for the evening.
Well, this was fun, y'all. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you both so much for making time and sharing your process, your work with archives. Thanks to Kelly and Nikki and Lauren and everyone in here for helping to create this great opportunity and event for all of us to share and discuss and think about ways we can not only improve archives, but connect more with arts. This has been, I'm very grateful to have been able to have been a part of this.
Yeah, I was happy to do it.
Thank you all so much. And Nikki posted to the chat, but this recording will be up on YouTube, so you can share this conversation with others in the arts community and the just Austin community at large, and with, of course, with information professionals, because I think there was just such great ideas that I'm excited to talk about with other colleagues at Austin Public Library and the History Center. So thank you, big thank you to Dave and Veronica. Very happy that y'all were here tonight, and thanks Aaron for moderating. And just as a reminder, the next one will be moderated by Rachel Winston, who is with us tonight, I see, and with artists Semenche and Adrian Aguilera. So that'll be April 19th. So thank you, everybody.
Very cool. Appreciate it.